The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the latest in the Gemalto series of Ask the Experts webinars. So today the topic is software licensing in an embedded world. My name is Thurston Johnston. I'm a senior pre-sales consultant for the software monetization division of Gemalto, and I'm based here in the UK in Camberley, just outside of London. So as before I start, if you have any questions or if any issues with the audio, please feel free to enter them into the chat window provided, and I'll answer them at the end. I will also provide my contact details at the end for any further questions or discussion. Today I'll be talking about the different aspects of licensing embedded software and a few things of what you need to be looking at, or at the very least be aware of, to maximize your investment of time, knowledge and money in your embedded application. And when we say embedded application, we're generally talking about computer software that's running on a device that is typically not thought of as a computer. So this software is often very simple and very focused, but can also be very sophisticated in more complex applications. Usually it's running on a limited footprint with some kind of fixed hardware, and typically not controlled or even started by a human interface, but through a machine interface instead. Now, through our work in software monetization and also machine-to-machine communication at Gemalto, we've seen a continued development in the market in how we look at embedded software. And the following is some of the things we are seeing. Product value is increasingly being derived from features differentiated by software and not just the hardware itself. So many hardware companies are starting to become software vendors. For additional revenue, hardware manufacturers, by including licensing and entitlement management as part of the business strategy, can open new markets and expand business models. Business strategy and goals, they translate to development requirements. And typically this process is the reverse of that. And as embedded moves towards the Internet of Things, development requirements need to be revisited as there are more platforms to consider, security needs are greater, and preventing reverse engineering. The time to market factor also, as well as hardware in the field that is now connected and can be upgraded remotely. In general, there needs to be ease of application development for the stakeholders who are also involved in the Internet of Things application development process. The need for protection and licensing varies based on the level and combination of hardware and richness of the feature set. One of the biggest concerns we see of embedded application developers is security, given the possible network connectivity. Almost every conversation I have with an embedded prospect typically always involves some sort of discussion on security. But of course, any element of protection can be applied at any level. So, however, the overwhelming benefit gained from the full spectrum of protection and licensing is with a software monetization strategy, whereby protection and licensing is combined, along with things like license management, entitlement management, and back office integration. So I'd like to give you a little bit of background on why embedded is growing and moving towards software. So as I alluded to previously, traditional device vendors are moving towards rich software-enabled products for several reasons, including things like growing the popularity of virtual appliances, device-centric functions shifting to the cloud, the hardware itself becoming commoditized, and CPUs becoming smaller, faster, and more importantly, more power efficient. Appliances are typically priced differently depending on features such as RAM, memory, video resolution, CPU, speed parallelization. However, device hardware is now so commoditized that manufacturing costs across product editions are generally quite equivalent. And as CPU technology provides faster, more reliable execution with lower power consumption, Many devices traditionally manufactured with ASICs, or application-specific integrated circuits, are now being manufactured as embedded devices. So there was once a clear division between hardware and software. In order to get certain functionality, the hardware guys needed to make sure that the hardware was designed as such, with a number of hardware options made available. So you have multiple hardware versions with inventory and cost implications. More hardware versions, the number of SKUs just grows and grows. And with advancing technology, lower sensor costs and greater connectivity, software is increasingly becoming incorporated into the hardware, creating value based on software features and not just the hardware capabilities. So this development introduces a new factor to the embedded applications world, whereby we can create recurring revenue by monetizing software and not just selling a piece of hardware. For example, you can benefit or monetize on the software by controlling the features which are disabled or locked, and then enabled remotely at a later point by virtue of the license provided to the customer. So this in turn makes it critical to revisit the considerations during the development phase. How exactly do I as a developer enable this? How do developers align product requirements with the business goals or strategy? So if we take a look at the charts overall, we can understand that protecting your assets and benefiting from the value your product brings is taking an increasingly important role in embedded applications. So just to go through the charts, if we look in the left-hand corner, we have hardware which is fairly straightforward in its purpose. And although not simple, it's a basic component with basic software, such as an embedded chip to be included in another product. So the range of hardware is typically limited in features, so generally feature distinction is not needed. The value is in the hardware itself. We do want to make sure that the device is secure, and we want to protect the IP we have in development of the device. But we don't necessarily need to track who is using the device, how the device is being used, or track the usage details from the device. So we typically things in the hardware point of view, a basic piece of hardware, such as a chip with an ARM processor there. It's basic software. It's not feature-rich, although it does need to be protected. Above that, in the upper left-hand corner, we have devices that need IP protection and protection from reverse engineering. So an example of this could be a car which was once all mechanical and then slowly had operational software added to it, to the point where now it has a feature-rich software suite. I mean, look at a Tesla car, for example. Most of the functionality is based in software, obviously, but it's the feature-rich software which is the differentiating factor in purchasing. Again, depending on the model of the car, software can be up to anything of 16% of the value of that car. So although the hardware itself may not need protection, the embedded software does. And in center of all this is the fact that embedded software is increasingly used to provide rich features in appliances and intelligent devices. So if we move over to the lower right-hand corner, we have hardware that can be produced in one version and differentiated by turning features on and off remotely. So for example, in this one, taking a 16-port switch and turning it into a 32-port switch via software, for example. And at the top end of the spectrum, we have complex hardware with feature-rich software. And the focus here is really not just on the hardware, but the software and the available features. And if we look in the upper right-hand corner where we see the most sophisticated hardware with the most feature-rich software, and a classic example being medical devices. And we see here an operating room suite. So we have new models for medical device companies for letting hospitals use equipment on a per-use basis instead of buying the equipment outright, which can be a huge investment. It's a win-win situation for both the device manufacturer and the hospital. Equipment can be monitored for predictive maintenance, for example. You can be proactive instead of reactive. And from a business perspective, it's important for us to know who is using the equipment and how. So based on this product management, we can make roadmap decisions as to which features are needed and which are not. From a development perspective, there needs to be this capability built into the software. So obviously the development needs will change. And working with a range of devices popping up as a result of the advancing technology is definitely a new and different domain for most application developers. The changes to these devices as they integrate into the Internet of Things will call for ways to make their development much more approachable. So for example, there's no human on the other end that can click on an option or push a button to upgrade. A lot of these devices will be field deployed in many situations, and in some cases for up to 10 to 15 years without anyone ever touching them, for example. But actually the real growth in IoT is in the area that is referred to as the industrial IoT, which spans a number of markets such as medical, industrial robotics, that's retail and manufacturing. And in the past, we would typically send a field engineer or technician to do an upgrade. But today we look to have remote upgrades and ideally do that in real time. And this functionality needs to be built in at the basic level. And how do we make it easier for developers to meet business goals and monetize their software? Now, development itself increasingly is not a standalone activity. It's not just the developers with the primarily directing things. There is an end goal of a product or service. And generally, these are tied into business goals or strategy. So whether it be IP protection, managing licenses, getting visibility into how customers are using the product, or even empowering the customers, there are many things to look at and be aware of. These various business goals and development concerns are what we see in really every type of software licensing scenario. Doesn't have to be the embedded world or the full-blown applications. So whether it is full-blown large multi-application suites right down to small devices with a simple piece of software, the concerns are generally the same. Different departments and different stakeholders will also have some kind of interest and possible requirements that also need to be taken into consideration. And generally, these requirements are often technically led, usually from engineering upwards. But there's always going to be some kind of business requirement that needs to sort of feed down to development for a two-way process. So if we now look at the software monetization topology for embedded applications, hopefully you will see how licensing, license management, and entitlements fit into the whole process from start to end. So we start off with the embedded application itself, with its associated OS or lack of OS if it's bare metal, its hardware, and some form of license key, which will usually most easily be a software license. But depending on the type of hardware and if ports are available, it can be a hardware license, or like a USB dongle, or even increasingly, if there's internet connectivity, it can be a cloud-based license. The system builder themselves will put the system together and with a generated license key, which will then be dispatched to the end user or customer. And that device can be pre-activated or activated by the customer's end. Then once at the end customer, information can be fed back to and from the device or devices for reporting purposes. The licenses themselves, they can be updated or even revoked. And really the thing that's driving this and the key part of this process is the entitlement management system. This is where the license keys themselves are generated. And the license key which develops, the license key which determines what the customer has access to and how they can use it. We like to think of this as the build once and license many. You build everything into one application, and it's the license key which determines what functionality it has. And this entitlement management system that can be hosted on-premise by the software vendor, hardware vendor. It can be hosted by a third party, or even cloud-based. And it's here that you create and generate and manage the catalog of products, the features, and the license models available, combined with some kind of customer information or database. This management system will also handle things like reporting, usage data, and it can also connect back to back office systems for order entries such as Salesforce, Oracle, SAP, or even a billing system. So all this combines together in a system that can be fully automated, integrated into existing workflows, help reduce the workload of engineering, sales, and finance. And it's a system that provides many kinds of information that can be used for business intelligence, marketing, technical support, and also sales. So for the second half of the session, I just want to take you through just some of the sort of nuts and bolts of software licensing, and a few things that regularly crop up and are dealt with, whether it's through a solution from Gemalto or a third party. So if we start looking at IP protection, which is, as I said before, the security of the IP always crops up in conversations with customers and prospects. And IP protection, I definitely think, is one of the most important aspects of software licensing and should always be considered or thought about. I mean, even if you don't want to license the features and monetize them, you certainly don't want to be losing money from people stealing your code, creating clones, and making money off your hard work. And often security is thought of as a barrier to functionality and ease of use. But even having the most basic protection is going to help deter opportunistic hackers. Now, one simple and basic way to do this is to have some kind of encryption, potentially obfuscation of your code or application, making it at the very least difficult or potentially nearly impossible for someone to statically hack your code. So in this case, the application will only run and be decrypted if a valid license key is present and accessible. And that license key can be local to the device, or maybe again in the cloud, or on a network with a license manager. You can take this a step further and protect against dynamic hacking. So in this example, let's say we have a device such as an industrial robot with a debugger in line there. So that robot itself is going to be active with the actual application running, controlling it, managing it. So the code itself cannot be encrypted. So hackers can do a cache dump with tracing and potentially steal that code. So one of our solutions, for example, you should have in any enforcement you have, is being able to detect if a debugger is present. Then deleting or clearing that cache that's been created or generated, and the system stops working. So any hackers can't get at the runtime. Another option you could use is something we recently introduced, which is something called AppOnChip. And this makes use of a hardware license, which could be a small integrated circuit chip soldered to the board, or even a USB dongle plugged in, again, depending on the form factor of the device, for the ports available. And what this does is force selected pieces of the code or the application to actually execute on the hardware license key itself, but without storing any application code on it. So without the key present, the application simply fails to execute, providing another layer of security if needed. Again, this kind of thing protects against people moving the code around. Again, speaking to a customer recently, where they make use of the Raspberry Pi. And as anyone's aware of the Raspberry Pi, the operating system is stored on the SD card. So you could pull the operating system out, put into another Raspberry Pi, and have access to the code. Whereas if you had, say, for example, this AppOnChip enabled, they can take most of the code, but the application won't run unless it's back in the original device, so locking it to it. So next, if we look at things like something like product versioning, and this is a very important part of the licensing scheme, and is generally one of the most understood methods, whatever the software or application may be. And this can be thought of as either different tiers of product, say bronze, silver, and gold, bronze being the most basic, and gold having the full functionality. Or just a normal product version, for example, say text edit version 1.0, version 2.0, etc. The point being here that each tier or version or package has different functionality. So a license enforcement technology should give you the ability to build an application with all the features included and allow you to create products with various features locked or unlocked. You build the application once, but the license key determines what's available and lets you create multiple products or packages. The people doing the order entry, they don't need to know anything about coding or engineering. They should be able to just tick some boxes to enable features or disable features and generate that license. So if we just take this simple example where we have features A, B, and C on the left, these can be bound in multiple ways to make, say, 3 different packages. And we can go even a step further here and have different license models for each package, or even for each feature. For example, you could have feature A be perpetual and feature B and C be a subscription or usage-based. You can really get very creative with how you create the licensing and features there. And this leads us on to a very popular question that is another important thing to think of, and that's the remote feature management. Is it actually possible to remotely update a feature set for your device? The customer may have purchased an upgrade or possibly wants to disable some features they never use, for example. So whether it be through an online customer portal, whether it's behind the scenes, under the hood, direct updating of the device, or maybe even a manual process, manually entering a license key, for example. Your entitlement or license management system needs to be able to handle this. Next, we have business model versatility. So deciding what kind of business or licensing model you wish to use for your embedded software. So on the left, we have the traditional sales models, and these typically involve a one-off cost for a perpetual license. So if again, this kind of thing where the customer can buy your application and you'll never see them again. So typically people will often add in, say, some kind of support or maintenance contracts. There'll be an upgrade sales cycle also. Combined with that, a renewal sales process. But newer models offer a degree of flexibility that many customers are demanding. So things like pay-per-use, prepaid, postpaid, and subscription. Increasingly, it's the end customer that's determining what license models companies are using. And it's very important to remember that different business models can have an impact on things. So things like the product sale price, for example. I mean, we've seen this with Adobe when they changed to subscription. And that changing to subscription normally means the price of the application will drop. So that when you do the change, there'll be often a dramatic decrease in revenue. But obviously the point of subscription is that you get a regular flow of income. So in time, you get that higher revenue, but there'll always be an initial drop in your revenues that needs to be thought about. But there can also be an additional impact on your supplier-customer relationship, supplier, for example, and the risks they may be taking. So we mentioned usage and business intelligence previously, and this is becoming very valuable to hardware and software vendors, especially in the embedded space. We're talking about feature usage here, not specific actual customer data, which of course there are privacy and compliancy laws that need to be met. So all we're really doing is just saying, okay, how often are they using one feature or clicking this button? Knowing exactly what features are being used, or just as importantly, not being used, is invaluable information. It can drive roadmap direction, where research and development need to invest their time and money, and where you could make more money and keep the product relevant to the customer's needs. Now, if you just take a look at the graph in the middle here, just some example business intelligence that may have come through. You can sort of clearly see how the usage shows what's actually happening with a particular customer. So the bottom left, you see it's very, very flat, hardly any usage. Then after a period of time, people start discovering that feature. So the feature is relevant, but advertising and marketing have not advertised it, or maybe it's not an easily accessible feature. The top left is exactly what we want to see. Quick uptake of the usage and continued usage. So that's a relevant feature. That's fine. That's great. Top right, we see again initial usage and then a quick drop-off of usage of a feature. So something's up with that feature. It doesn't meet the expectations, and that's something we need to address very quickly. And then the bottom right, which doesn't tell us, well, it tells us a lot, but also not a lot. So that feature, it's not being used. It's very rarely being used at any point in time. So that could mean that the feature is either not relevant to the customer, again, not accessible in the application, or again, just not advertised. So you can quickly see how I think it's just a nice example of what the usage data can show you. So there's some of the things to be aware of. And just to give you what's some of the things we're doing in the embedded markets with other companies. So Gemalto, as we're a leader in some of the leaders in software monetization or licensing, and also offering embedded solutions, we think it's pretty important to encompass imported embedded development companies in the markets, basically integrating our license enforcement APIs into their development environments. We need to make it easy for people to develop. So thus, in order to help embedded developers integrate licensing, we've partnered with some of the main providers of embedded application development environments, in particular National Instruments and MathWorks. So National Instruments, they're a producer of automated test equipment, some pretty cool virtual instrumentation software. And we've integrated into their LabVIEW graphical development language. Then following on from that, we have MathWorks with a MATLAB programming language for algorithm development, numeric computation, data analysis, and visualization of instruments. So Simulink is one of the tools. It's an environment for system-level modeling, simulation, and verification of communication and electronic systems. So again, our license enforcement can be used to license all the applications that are developed with MATLAB and Simulink, and also National Instruments. So I'll bring this to a close. I'm sure you're going to agree that really the benefits of licensing your embedded applications are well worth investigating or at least thinking about. So business agility, being able to quickly modify product packaging, licensing or pricing models allows you to respond to a changing and evolving market and hopefully before your competitors. Maximizing revenue, it's a no-brainer. We typically like to say keeping the honest users honest, just basically preventing unauthorized usage, accidental or malicious, of your software, and it ensures that you at least get the expected revenue you should be getting. End user experience is increasingly important, so enhancing their experience by empowering them to manage aspects of their deployment is a fantastic way of increasing their satisfaction, with also the benefits of reducing your workload. And really one of my favorites is the increased business intelligence. Being able to see a product's usage and the activation history, for example, is extremely valuable and really can focus development and make it more efficient. Are people using, we see so many customers that will buy an application and then it just sits on the shelf and doesn't get activated. So it's good to know why. And lastly, reducing costs again is a no-brainer. Reducing administration or back office tasks around license creation and management can free up a lot of time, especially with tech support. Too often companies' tech support teams spend a good deal of time sorting out licensing issues instead of actual product support. Again, typically what we see is we've had some people saying that their company's tech support team is taking up 10, 20, or even some cases 25% of their tech support calls are licensing problems. So just to close the session today, I'll just finish with a very, very quick overview of what Gemalto do in the software monetization space. And we have many customers across the board who are hardware, embedded, and software vendors across a wide range of verticals. And I'm sure many names there you'll recognize. So we really cover anything from small business, the one-man bands, startups, right up to large enterprises. And our software monetization portfolio is made up of the following solutions and services. So our most famous product, I think, is LDK, which is very much an out-of-the-box software protection, licensing, and entitlement management system. It's been designed to get you up and running very quickly in a very secure way. Our second is RMS, which is a very flexible enterprise-grade license enforcement system. And it's been designed to handle pretty much any kind of license system and to scale up to handle any size deployment. Sentinel Cloud is our next level of software licensing. This is offering cloud-based licensing for things like software as a service applications, but also on-premise applications. Tying that all together is Sentinel EMS, which is our entitlement management system, very much the backbone of all of our products, that gives you a web-based licensing and entitlement management system. And the great thing with that is that it also supports any third-party or even homegrown license enforcement technologies. And lastly, we have our professional services team underlying that, which can offer full consulting and implementation services. So that brings us to the end of the session today. I hope that you found it useful, it give you some ideas of where to go next or what to implement licensing-wise in your embedded or even your non-embedded applications. It's really never too late to change or implement software licensing in the embedded world. It really is a world of opportunity out there to find new revenue streams or just increase the revenue earned from what you already have. And Gemalto certainly can help you, enable you to achieve that. So thank you very much for your time today. If you have any further questions or think of anything at a later time, you can contact me directly at thurston.johnston@gemalto.com. The image is up there. You can check out all information at gemalto.com. All the information is up on the site there. I mean, as we were acquired by originally SafeNet, so the SafeNet website is should still be there. So if there are any questions, feel free to enter the chat window now, and I'll go through them, and then I'll be more than happy to answer at a later date as well. Okay, so let's see what's come through. See if I can bring the questions up here. Okay. Okay, so someone's asking, will the slides be made available? Yes, they will. You'll get an email shortly after this with all the slides and contact information there. Another question, do we have licensing support for iOS and Android? So Android, we do fully support with our various license enforcement. iOS is slightly more tricky due to the way, obviously Apple are very, very strict about running code on their devices. So whilst we don't have specific support for iOS with our tools, we do have ways to work around that, whether it's sort of through a browser. Typically, we do have ways to work with iOS. Yes, the recording, it will also be available for you. Okay, so if there are no more questions coming through, again, feel free to email me at any time. I'll be more than happy to help you with anything. If you get any existing customers, again, I can help you with that. So thank you very much for your time today, and I shall end the presentation there, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.